Hi, everyone. My name is Tessa Green. I'm the Program Director for the Good Systems Grand Challenge. I want to thank you all for joining us for the International View of Smart Cities and Procurement panel. Today's panel concludes a very special week of programming exploring how procurement guidelines can influence the development of AI for good. And it represents a first of its kind collaboration between a university and the World Economic Forum. As one of 3 UT Austin Grand Challenges, Good Systems brings together researchers from across the UT campus to investigate how we can ensure AI technologies benefit society. This partnership with the World Economic Forum showcases our combined commitment to improving the state of the world through AI and technology. And to provide the official welcome, we have UT's Deputy Vice President for Research, Jennifer Lyon Gardner. Dr. Lyon Gardner leads a number of research capacity building efforts at the university, including designing and implementing programming that promotes collaborative research, such as the campus-wide UT Research Grand Challenge Initiative Bridging Barriers, which houses Good Systems. She also leads the Research Development Group, which provides competitive intelligence and proposal development guidance to research teams pursuing major external funding. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jennifer Lyon Gardner.
Thanks so much, Tessa. Good morning, everybody. It's an honor to be here today to welcome the World Economic Forum to the University of Texas at Austin for our final day of conference activity. As Tessa mentioned, I'm the Deputy Vice President for Research and one of the executive sponsors of the Good Systems Research Grand Challenge, which has been hosting the World Economic Forum this week. Good Systems is a grand challenge at UT that designs AI technology to benefit society. We have researchers across more than almost 30 disciplines who work on this very important question. They work with each other and also with industry and with government partners, which means that the Good Systems Grand Challenge is not just interdisciplinary, but it's also transdisciplinary. And our collaboration with the World Economic Forum this week is another example of that. We were honored that the World Economic Forum chose to spend this week with us on a deep dive into the question of procurement guidelines for AI technologies, which I know when I first heard this, it sounded like a hyper-specific topic, which it is, but it's also a very important one. Government purchasing decisions mean big dollars and big impacts to people's lives. When it comes to AI government procurement, that will influence how AI will be developed. While the World Economic Forum originally considered procurement at the national level, as we've discussed this week in the previous sessions, state and local governments are going to be key drivers in determining how AI affects the lived urban experience for many of us. It's been a really amazing week, and I'd like to recap some of the highlights for those of you who may not have been here for every event. On Monday, UT President Jay Hartzell affirmed the important role of government procurement guidelines in developing AI. And he reminded us that ultimately, government procurement is a measure of how democratic values are expressed in market settings. To better understand this, we brought in our Associate Vice President for Research, Innovation, and Economic Impact, Christine Dixon-Teasing, along with UT faculty who, in addition to being Good Systems leaders, head up other important initiatives on the campus. On Tuesday, we had an interdisciplinary group of graduate students who were nominated by Good Systems to have an opportunity to have one-on-one FaceTime with staff from the World Economic Forum. Many of those students are going to stay involved in the forum, which will be establishing a special task force to take some of the lessons we've learned this week and make them available to research institutions in the Global South. On Wednesday, we took a look at how guidelines that were initially crafted for national governments might be adapted to state, regional, and local governments. Our panelists took a hard look at this issue and they coined the phrase adoption at the speed of trust, which is probably how AI is most likely to come into our governments. In the panel on industry, we learned that if governments specify certain guidelines in procurement, then industry can justify using their R&D dollars to develop technologies that meet those criteria. In other words, government procurement has the power to drive industry practice. We hope that all these insights will be helpful as we move forward into our final day, which focuses on global smart cities. We know that global cooperation is essential in the way that AI gets developed, and this is reflected in the World Economic Forum's Global AI Action Alliance. We also know that people will likely experience AI in urban environments more than anywhere else. This has been a week of education and insight, and we hope very much to continue our relationship with the World Economic Forum on this and other important issues. Smart cities, the topic of this morning's session, is one of the Good Systems 8 research focus areas. We know that the way we live and work is going to change. It already has in the past year. The World Economic Forum saw that with the advent of the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and COVID-19 has hastened our evolution to an online and remote work society. Smart cities are the cities of the future and will be the places that many of us will live in, perhaps sooner than we think. Throughout the week, Kayford Butterfield has emphasized that we need to work on AI globally. Even though procurement and development will happen in particular locales, the impacts of that are going to be global, and the impacts will be felt first and most powerfully in the world's metropolitan areas. We think it's quite appropriate that we close this really interesting and enlightening week with the World Economic Forum by discussing smart cities in a global context. Tessa, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Before we start, a few things. This panel is being recorded and will be shared with registrants and available on our website following the event. During the panel, we invite you to submit questions through the Q&A tab. You'll find it at the bottom of your screen in the Zoom menu. And we encourage you to upvote questions that you'd like to see the panel answer. So to moderate our panel today, we have the current chair and founding member of the Good Systems UT Grand Challenge, Dr. Zhenfeng Zhao. Dr. Zhao is an associate professor in the School of Architecture, chair of the Smart City Bridging Disciplines program, and founding director of the Urban Information Lab. His research focuses on urban informatics and machine learning, particularly how different technologies come together to create smart cities and how those affect people's behaviors. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Zhenfeng Zhao.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Tessa. It's my pleasure to be here. As Tessa mentioned, my research focuses on smart city urban informatics. As we all know, AI is changing our life from all perspectives, whether it's autonomous driving vehicle to robotics to facial to voice recognition. All these examples are personal level examples. But AI also changed our life from a community perspective. Governments are in the forefront in this process. Take smart transportation as an example, from infrastructure to vehicle technology to traffic cameras. This will make our life, make our cities smarter and more efficient. During this process, government procurement will play a major role in how AI technology or how the technology will be developed and deployed in cities. Procurement guidelines, as recommended by World Economic Forum, build open communication channels between government and industry into the procurement agreement, which help both parties to maintain the integrity of the data and the algorithm. I just want to stress that the communication must be ongoing because key ethical considerations like privacy or bias in datasets may not be realized until systems are implemented. That's why the ongoing review and the communication process are so important. The more sensitive the data is, the more checks need to be built in. Procurement guidelines also play a role to in economic development. Establish clear procurement guidelines can level the playing field for all industry companies who would like to have an opportunity to do business with the governments, whether it is a tech giant like Amazon or Google or young local startup. In my own research, I have used the different AI and smart city technology trying to understand the people's behavior and better place cities to improve transportation, housing, and health for all its residents. With respect to transportation, we have analyzed different micro-mobility travel patterns in major US cities, such as bike share and e-scooters. We also developed an autonomous last-mile delivery system based on advanced robotics platform. With respect to housing, we have used a machine learning model to evaluate Austin housing development in the last 30 years and how different government policies might affect affordability in the city. With respect to health, we have developed an AI system to predict community-level health based on physical and perceived neighborhood environment. Many cities will hire tech companies to analyze this data and make predictions. Take transportation as an example. We want to make sure that individual transportation data, such as bus rider, ship, or personal vehicle travels, is not leaked, that all personal identifying information is removed when we're doing research. While maintaining the integrity and the resolution of the data, we also want to ensure the privacy of the data. The right procurement guideline would build in checks to ensure privacy during the research and the technology development process. Now, I would like to thank Kay Fass-Butterfield and the World Economic Forum again for sharing their work with us during this week, which help us better understand how procurement guideline can be used to influence the development of AI technology. As the chair of Good System, I just think it is very, very important to bring this topic to the forefront of people's attention. The World Economic Forum has done tremendous work in this area, and we want to encourage scholars and researchers and industry practitioners, in addition to city managers, to think about how this important strategy will shape our future. We all live in cities. By 2050, 68% of world population will be living in cities. The city will be getting smarter and smarter. AI technology play a major role in this changing process. And it's our responsibility to develop a detailed, fair, transparent procurement guideline to guide this process. It is fitting to end this week thinking about how this city on a global scale, because we recognize the importance of global cooperation in thinking about how to build a fair and equitable smart city. This is part of the Good System mission. Together, we can develop ethical AI technology to benefit the whole society. Now, I would like to introduce a panelist, Maria De-Arteaga. Maria is an assistant professor in Information Risk and Operation Management Department at McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas at Austin. She's also a co-faculty member in the UT Machine Learning Laboratory. He holds a joint PhD in Machine Learning and Public Policy from Carnegie Mellon University. Her research is focused on the risk and opportunity and decision-making process in the context of sustainable societies. In her research, she aimed to understand the limits and the risk of using machine learning in these contexts and develop human-centered machine learning algorithms that can improve the decision-making process. She's also the current chair of diversity and inclusion for FACCT and the chair of the steering committee of machine learning for development. Maria, I will turn to you. Please make some remark related to smart city and AI.
Hello, everyone. I am very happy to be here this morning. And what I would like to bring to the table today relates to the fact that as has been pointed out during the week, the use of AI in smart cities holds many promises and can help us develop more livable and more enjoyable cities. But as we've also discussed, there are risks of deploying AI in this context. And if not handled properly, these risks could mean that smart cities are cities that are more livable for some, while further marginalizing others. And some of the risks that have been highlighted in this context, for instance, include of the risks that we've talked a lot about in the media are the risks of bias in predictive policing, for example, and more generally, bias in AI-driven resource allocation and services. These have spurred a lot of interest in AI ethics, and we've seen how both academia and industry have started to develop and consider deploying bias mitigating algorithms, bias detection algorithms. However, a lot of this work remains focused on the context of a few countries. And in particular, the countries where the researchers and the practitioners who are leading this work are based. So for instance, in the context of a lot of this work has been centered in the US, and so that means that it is very informed by the US context. And I think that here is where government procurement can have a big impact. When we're talking about risks of algorithmic bias, we're concerned about how past injustices and patterns of marginalization may be compounded by the deployment of an AI algorithm. And these risks are very grounded on the local context. Whatever the risks of compounding previous patterns of discrimination are depend on what were those previous patterns of discrimination. And so I think that here government procurement has the potential to ensure that the technologies that are being deployed globally make sense locally and that they do not perpetuate previous harms. In particular, I think that here there's an opportunity for the fact that if a company wants to sell their products for a given context, wants to sell their products for a given government, they need to ensure and show that they've done the work of seeing that this technology works in that context. And so I think that when talking about the risks of AI bias, government procurement is one step that can help us in ensuring that the technologies that are deployed globally make sense locally, and that we're really considering the risks of bias that exist in a given context. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for the wonderful remark. Next, I will turn to our new and old friend, Kay Fitzbartfield. Kay is the head of AI and machine learning and a member of the executive committee of the World Economic Forum. He's one of the foremost experts in the world on topic of governance of AI. Kay is a barrister, former judge, professor, co-founder of AI Globe, a technologist and entrepreneur, just to name a few. And he has an interest in how humanity can equitably benefit from new technologies, especially AI. We are so grateful to Kay for setting this up with us for the World Economic Forum at the UT, and thanks for her to join us again today. Kay, I will turn it to you.
Thank you. And this has been such a privilege to work with UT. I actually was working as an adjunct professor in law at UT at the time that this challenge started off. And so having been there at the beginning, it's such a privilege to be able to do this week with you. And also what we hope is that this week is something that we can scale globally with other universities around the world and with your passionate help, particularly from Andrea. And so, you know, one of the things that we always think about when we're doing work at the World Economic Forum in our projects is, yes, we'll do it in this particular jurisdiction, but how do we scale it globally? And I'm delighted that we are also going to be able to do that with this piece of work with UT. I wanted to start my remarks with taking you back to the dark ages of 2014, when we really first started to talk in the media about AI ethics. I think that, you know, that was really because we saw that DeepMind had sold itself to Google, but not without an ethics board. And Stephen Hawking went so far that year to say, if we don't get AI right, it could be the last thing that we as humans do, but it could also be the best thing that we do. And I think the focus then was probably more on the problems of superintelligence. But as we have developed more and more AI, we have seen that actually there are real and significant problems now. And of course, that's what all of our work addresses. We have been talking about procurement by governments all this week. And so actually, I want to take you to procurement by you yourself. Because you're buying AI at the moment. You might have a Nest, you might have an Alexa, you certainly have a mobile phone. There's AI, you might have a vacuum cleaner using AI. And that vacuum cleaner, for example, might be using facial recognition, as might your doorbell. So actually, we don't need to just rely upon governments to do this correctly. We as individuals need to be informed about what AI can do to benefit us and what AI can do which we wouldn't want it to be doing in our personal lives. Just yesterday, we had hearings about the impact of social media on the way we vote and the way we think about politics. And so I'd like you just to bear that in mind whilst I take you on a journey about your personal procurement very swiftly, because I don't have much time. So at the moment, we are having this debate about how social media and the AI that runs that, the algorithms that push content works. But we also know that AI can nudge us in ways that make us healthier, for example. But what happens if nudging becomes more than nudging? What happens when we use the tools of being able to understand whether we're sad or happy to actually push us into making decisions that we might not want to make? And what happens when we add the power of that technology to our children's toys? Some of you might have procured, because it's just another word for bought, might have bought an AI-enabled toy for your child. You might have thought that it was going to be great for them. It would educate them and the child would get ahead. But did you read any of the terms and conditions? Do you know what's happening to your child's data? Do you know what conversations your child is having with that toy? Do you know what the content is that's being delivered to your child? Do you know whether your child's values and beliefs will be formed now by those interactions with that device? And do you want those values and beliefs formed for your child? So we need to do a lot more work. We need to have this conversation with the general public, and we need to have you really think about your own decisions, because when you get the other end from children and you get old like me, you're also going to be using AI to help you survive in your homes as old people. And as old people, we're vulnerable people. And so we have the same problems, and we need to have the same ethical conversation about the use of AI in old age. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kay, for the wonderful remark. Yes, we definitely need to pay attention to how individual and government use AI and purchase AI. With that being said, I will turn to our next guest speaker panelist, Dr. Wong Kim from South Korea. Dr. Kim is an associate professor in the College of Architecture and Architecture Engineering at Hanyang University, Arica in South Korea. She's also a UT alumni. He's also a UT alumni. He finished his master's degree in community and regional planning at UT Austin. Also finished a regional planning PhD degree from Texas A&M University. His research included geographic information system, building information modeling, smart city development, drones, and sustainable urban simulations. Dr. Kim I will turn to you and welcome to 40 Acres.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hwanyong Kim. I'm an associate professor at Hanyang University in South Korea. First of all, I would like to say thank you very much for inviting me to this valuable opportunity. It feels actually really great to get connected with the Longhorns once again. Well, since I'm an urban planning expert in this group, I'll give my remark based on urban planning aspects. And I know you guys are very excited about smart city and AIs and all those technologies, but I'll provide some a little cautious, skeptical viewpoint about those terms. Please don't get me wrong. I am actually involved in directly and indirectly in many smart city development in South Korea. So my views are actually based on real projects and real development. Let's say when we were doing urban planning in about 50 years ago, we generally had a belief that new technologies will bring a brighter future. When Frank Lloyd Wright was designing the Broadacre city in the mid-1900s, he wanted a personal helicopter in your backyard so that you can fly and meet your friends. That seemed very strange and impossible at that time, but fortunately, now it is very close to reality with urban air mobility. What that means is that when we are doing urban planning 50 years ago, our concern was more about developing and adapting new technologies. However, the problem nowadays is that the speed of those improvements is much faster than the speed of our imagination and real practices. It means when we apply a new technology, and I'm sure that it will be very good, we are not so sure about the exact impact of using them. In many cases, technological progress moves faster than our political preparations. And for that reason, we usually tend to believe that they will make a brighter future. However, this is a little dangerous. Think about all those social network services, such as Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or Twitter. I mean, of course, they gave us a lot of positive aspects, such as more connectivity, more interactions, but it's not very hard to actually find out their negative impact, such as privacy or online scams and so many other things. So what we need to think about when using smart city, the term smart city or AI, is not about how fancy or how convenient they are. It is rather more about how we are going to use them properly and have some time to actually discuss about some side effect they can bring to us. The society in nowadays moves very fast, and so fast that we do not have enough time to actually digest about the meanings of those new technologies. Even though we use the term smart city and AI very frequently, we do not exactly know what they precisely mean and how we can benefit from them. We have some general belief on smart city and AI, but the degree of impact of using them is very different to urban circumstances. Cities like Austin or Seoul, where I live, and Singapore, and some cities like Manila, Bangkok, or Jakarta, they have all different urban circumstances. However, when we think about smart city, we generally imagine very similar future. And this overall imagination should be accepted very critically. So what I would like to say is that we should have a certain consensus and overall objectives for using those terms and implementing those technologies before actually we just have a strong belief toward it. Even though we probably are the richest generation in terms of the amount of data, it is actually a very good time for us to think more about the foundations and basic principles of human settlement. And by doing that and using those technologies together, we can actually promote a proper smart city and AI technologies in our city planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kim, for the wonderful remark on the risk and the advancement of technology. Yes, we have to fully understand the risk associated with smart city and AI and how we can use that to benefit the whole society. With that being said, I will turn to our next panelist, Mr. Tuan Wong. Mr. Tuan Wong is the Deputy Director of SGInnovate, a Singapore government-owned organization that invests in and help build deep tech startups, such as in artificial intelligence, med tech, quantum computing, autonomous technology, etc. He conceptualized deep tech for a good initiative between SGInnovate and global partners. Tuan curated the annual Deep Tech Summit, a best-in-class gathering of industry leaders, innovators, and investors look at the impact of frontier technology on our future economy and society. With that being said, Tuan, I will turn it to you.
Thank you very much, Jun Feng, and a very good morning to everyone who are tuning in. I am very privileged to be here at this important event, and I would like to thank the World Economic Forum, especially Kay, as well as UT, Alison and Andre in particular, for all the amazing hard work. Once again, my name is Tuan, and I am with SGInnovate. I have been listening to all of our fellow panelists sharing their viewpoints, whether it is from the academia or World Economic Forum's perspectives or from the urban planning perspective. And I would be contributing from an ecosystem builder helicopter viewpoint from my role at SGInnovate. We are a Singapore government-backed organization that works very closely with startups and talent and various stakeholders in the deep tech economy. Our belief is that technologies such as AI could help to improve the human condition and help build a more sustainable, more resilient future economy and society. The story of Singapore is interesting as we aspire to be the world's first smart nation. And SGInnovate has been driving Singapore's deep tech ecosystem towards this goal. We bring together tens of thousands of stakeholders together each year, just like what you are doing this week at UT, bringing everyone together, discussing government procurement rules in AI. We worked with hundreds of deep tech startups across industries, and many of them are from the US. We also developed a pipeline of deep tech talent who are ready to build and deploy AI solutions in the real world, hopefully in an ethical and responsible manner. In recent years, the ethical and responsible use of AI and technologies has been among the key themes that our corporate innovators, startups and investors, researchers and partners talk about, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, where there is a very fine balance between protecting public health and safeguarding private health data. It is not limited to any national boundaries, and therefore last year, SGInnovate and our global partners initiated the Deep Tech for Good program to advance the use of science and technology for economic and social good. My closing thought on the matter is that we are living in the most interesting of times with the advent of AI. I believe that AI is neither good nor bad. It is we who design, build, buy, and consume AI that determine whether it is good or not. So this is the concept of procurement by you that Kay mentioned earlier. AI is here to stay, and it is like the new electricity of our future economy and society, and we better make sure that it is more for good. I look forward to continuing the conversation and learning from everyone.
Thank you, Tuan, for the wonderful remark. Thanks for letting us know Singapore's aiming to become the first smart nation. That's no surprise to me, and I'm looking forward to that. Now we have heard from all our panelists. We will give. We would like to hear from our audience. Alison, please launch our first poll. So while reading the first poll, it's about who should be responsible for building, protecting, and maintaining the data and AI infrastructure. I will turn to our first panelist, Tuan, to ask some questions while you fill up the poll. Tuan, who are the stakeholders that the government should consult with to develop ethical, responsible AI and data guidelines?
Thanks, Junfeng. I thought that the first question is very much related to the poll that we are having right now. So let me just take a stab at it while we are waiting for the poll results. I can see the poll results right now, and exactly as what we're going to say, it is government and industry in partnership that will determine the right development of AI ethics guidelines and the adoption of those. I acknowledge that governments play a most important role to set standards and guidelines, as we have seen in how government procurement could help to effect industry behavior changes. At the same time, from our experience in Singapore, governments on their own are not able to keep up with all the technological progress. I think that's the point that Hwanyong was making earlier as well. There are three main stakeholder groups that I feel are most important for governments to work closely with. The first are corporates and SMEs who buy and sell, develop and use AI technologies. The second are researchers and startups who pioneer and pilot new AI algorithms and innovations. These are the people that actually set the pace of AI development and what it is that regulators, such as government agencies, should be aware of. And the third group are actually investors who should be aware of and contribute to the discourse on AI ethics because their capital drive industry and market behaviors. So I really want to applaud Kay and the World Connect Forum, as well as UT and Good Systems program on your efforts to bring various global stakeholders together to discuss this important topic. I want to just end off by highlighting that the World Economic Forum estimates that there are about 175 different sets of guidelines and principles globally on AI ethics. So it is very good in the sense that it demonstrates the importance of harnessing AI for good. But at the same time, there's now an implementation gap. How it is that we can put to good use these 170 different guidelines in the world. So this will be better addressed if industry stakeholders are involved right from the start and throughout the process. That is my thought on the matter. Back to you, Junfeng.
Thank you, Tuan, for the wonderful remark. If we think about infrastructure, the importance of infrastructure, we can think about the state highway, which is owned by and maintained by the government in the state. Also, something like mobile service, which is owned and operated by individual companies. So that's a great discussion how we should maintain, upgrade, and build infrastructure in relation to data and AI. With that being said, I will turn to our next panelist, Maria. I would like to ask one question related to the fairness. So what are the important algorithm fairness consideration in the context of government procurement, specific in Latin America?
Thank you for that question. And before I begin, I'm going to say thank you all co-panelists. I'm learning so much from all of you. I'm really enjoying this panel. Yeah, so these will hopefully give me a chance to make a little bit more concrete some of the points I made about the importance of thinking about the risks of AI bias locally. And so I think there's two main considerations here. The first one is thinking about the local risks, right? And so if we look at the context of Colombia, for instance, in 2016, we had a demobilization process, and we're currently in the process of trying to move past an armed conflict that lasted decades, some of which is still ongoing, and some of which we started having some of the demobilization processes started in 2002, right? So what does that mean? That one of the populations that we need to be concerned about when we're deploying new technologies are those individuals who were recently demobilized. Because there's no way we're going to move past a conflict if those individuals who are demobilized from a war are excluded from our societies. And in the context of data, that opens a lot of questions because this is a population for whom you have no data. And so if you decide that you're going to give credit loans based on all of the data that you have of people, or if you decide that you're going to give certain government support, anything that is based on historical records, that's not something that is going to work there. And so a lot of the conversation that we've had around algorithmic fairness that has been grounded on what are the risks of discrimination in the US doesn't necessarily transport to that context. And so there we need to understand, okay, how do we go about addressing these? And then related to that, there's also so for instance, we recently had some work at ACM Fact, that is the premier conference on AI bias, looking at the risks of predictive policing in Bogota and what happens when you have differential rates of victim reporting. Some of the ongoing work that we're doing there is, well, how do these risks that we found in terms of statistical patterns and how different rates of reporting influence biases in predictive policing, how does that relate to previous patterns of discrimination? What are these differential rates meaning? And just to finalize here, I think that the other element that is important is that a lot of the considerations that are being embedded in how we're thinking about algorithmic fairness and mitigating bias are influenced by specific legal contexts. And in terms of the technology that is developed in the US, for instance, is very grounded on US legislation. One of the implications of this is that you rarely have affirmative action style of algorithmic approaches because affirmative action is illegal in the US. That is not the case in a lot of countries of Latin America, where a lot of governments are making a lot of efforts towards programs of affirmative action. And so there we're also needing to rethink what are the goals of the algorithmic the fairness enhancing algorithmic interventions that we're doing. Yeah, and with this, I'll pass it back to you, Junfeng.
Thank you, Maria, for the wonderful comment. And we learned a lot about how procurement guidelines should be developed in Latin America. And thank you for the insight. With that being said, I will turn next question to our honored guest, Kay. Kay, what is economic forum and why are you involved in the policy making process? I think that's probably simple question, but we would like to ask. Thank you.
Yes, certainly. And just picking up on what Maria was saying, one of the reasons that we're involved is that it is important for us to think about policy, not just in the global north, but also in the global south. And so, as I've mentioned during this week, we have been working with IADB to actually, the Inter-American Development Bank, to actually ensure that the procurement work that we've done, for example, can be offered to everybody within their region. It may not be something you can take off the shelf and use immediately, but it can provide a starting point for many governments that have no starting point. And I think that that's truly important. And then just to the fairness issue, which is another reason why we're doing this work. You know, Brad Smith said, he's co-chair of our Global AI Council and president of Microsoft. He said that one of the problems with AI ethics is that we're trying to solve problems that human beings have not been able to solve over the last 2,000 or so years. And so, of course, it's difficult for us. Why are we involved in policy making? Why are we involved in this discussion? Well, because it's hard, and because, as the poll found, it's a really important discussion that we should be having in a multi-stakeholder grouping. So governments, nonprofits, academia, and the businesses themselves, because it's not something that one entity can solve. And the forums over the last 51 years really become that preeminent place for public-private partnership. So when our founder, Klaus Schwab, wrote the Fourth Industrial Revolution book, he said, we need to do something about this. And we have been involved in the work since 2017.
Thank you, Kay. We really appreciated all the work World Economic Forum has done for us, for all of us. And thank you again for the remark. I just want to mention, we are open discussion. All the panelists feel free to respond to each other. Also, audience, feel free to ask a question in the Q&A in the session, or just raise your hand. We'd like to hear back from you, audience, as well. So with that being said, I will ask one more question to our honored guest, Dr. Kim. So how will procurement from AI industry impact urban planning practice in the future? I know it's not exist right now, but how in the future will impact urban planning practice, especially in relation to smart city development?
Okay. Well, I mean, nowadays we use many, we try to use many technologies such as like unmanned vehicles, drone taxis, AI-based automations, machine learning, and so many new terms. And especially this is especially happening in South Korea. South Korean government is eager to implement those techniques in reality. In my personal opinion, however, we are not so ready to adapt these new terms yet. AI or any other technologies should be used with very thorough considerations. And even though AI can do a work for me, and I'm sure that will be much better than my work for sure, but I should be the one actually who decide the final outcome. And I should be the one determine how that work should be interpreted in human society. The reason is that we talk about AI very frequently, but AI will become a decision-making protocol. It's not just about transportation. It's not just about construction. AI will become a decision-making protocol. And that decision actually hugely impact human settlement. A city is for human, not for AI. And that actually decision is responsible for making all those changes in our world. And we are the ones who are really affected by those decisions. So AI, I think personally, should be used as a supporting tool, not the final decision maker. It should help us to determine better decisions. So in terms of AI usage, I think global consensus, like global guideline for using AI from the World Economic Forum seems like a very good start, because some other countries, like developing countries, are in short of resources of using AI. They are just accepting what they are given. They don't have enough time to actually digest what it means. So having a global consensus, have some time to actually digest those terms by themselves is really good opportunity. I think that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. Do we have any panelists who want to follow up response to Dr. Kim's remark? I think it's a super important question on how we should use and deploy AI. With that being said, I would like to launch the next poll, which is a very interesting question we're going to ask. So Alison, please launch the next poll. So I would like to hear from our panelists how each of you thinking about this question. So please take a moment to read the question, answer the question. As we all know, personal information or privacy is very, very important to each individual us. But in terms of smart city and AI technology, sometimes we have to make a little bit trade-off. So how each of you were thinking about this? So All right. Anybody want to start?
I can start. Because it's interesting. 44% of the people said they do not support data collection, and 56 support with a personally identifying information removed. And I actually think that the response to that is something that I keep talking about, that we don't have a good conversation going with members of the public. And so therefore you get, whenever you poll people, you're going to get a somewhat unusual outcome from it. I said I'd answer the question first because I choose not to live in a city, and I'm privileged not to live in a city. I have personally severe concerns about the use of facial recognition. And I agree with Brad when he says we need some legislation around facial recognition. It is something, and I don't generally believe in regulation on AI and uses of AI, but it is something that in places that value their privacy, we should have government intervention so that the government, which is supposed to represent us citizens, can take a view about how much we value our safety and how much we want to give away our private information. It shouldn't be in the hands of people deciding whether they want to put doorbells on the that identify people who pass by, for example.
Thank you, Kay, for the very nice remark. Any comment from the rest of the panel? We'd like to hear from you. Tuan?
Yes, so I think it is a most interesting and controversial topic at the same time. If I may just refer to the AI Superpowers book by Dr. Kai-Fu Lee, he painted a very utopian world where AI permeates all aspects of life. When you go to the supermarket will be able to tell what it is that your fridge is running short of and recommend to you your basket of things that you should get right there and then. When you go through the cashier, your facial recognition will be making the payment on your behalf. And many other wonderful things that we have heard about and learned about from the benefits of AI. I feel that that utopian, of course, we are far from that. But right now, there are already resilience, even from traditional compliant societies in Asia, such as Singapore, against the potential abuse of private data that are being collected through all of the AI tools that are being developed. I feel that there are two things that are critical. The first one is definitely in terms of consultation and conversation. I agree with Kay on that. People need to have a stronger mindset of how their data is being collected and what it is being used for, and what rights over the data that we should have. In Asian society, especially even in an advanced society like Singapore, I do not feel that we have that mindset strongly enough. A lot of the times we will feel that, yeah, it is okay for government on behalf of us to collect our data and to use it for whatever purpose that they deem necessary. Of course, it could work in Singapore because the degree of trust in government services is high here, but that may not be the case in a lot of other regions. The second part I think is important to the conversation too, is that there should be a recognition that different parts of the world view this topic very differently. So things that could be very acceptable in China, what Dr. Lee painted in his book, for example, and in some parts of Singapore and then elsewhere in Asia, might seem like a 1984 situation in Europe or North America. So this conversation between the global North and South might actually come to play again. But personally, I am ready to agree with the 56% of people who say that some degree of personal information can be collected for the common good.
Can I just come back on in what is a joking manner, but actually I feel it quite strongly. I don't want my fridge to tell me what I want to eat. I really want control of what I decide to eat that week.
Is that for health and food waste reasons?
I think that's just because otherwise you tend to, it feels as if you end up eating the same thing, and I want to experiment, and I love to cook, and I might want to cook croissant today and something else next week.
Very good input for some of our innovation teams working on that type of solutions then.
That's a wonderful discussion. Thank you, both Kay and Tuan. So we still have two panelists, Wong and Maria. We would like to hear your opinion about this interesting topic.
Okay. This is actually a really tricky question, because as a researcher myself, I would love to provide all those data sets as a researcher. As an individual myself, well, I'm not so much into providing all those personal information. Well, the problem is, the question actually asked about if we are promoting safer community. And that safer community actually means very different from individual. Our safety and your safety and some other safety can be very different. But the problem is how we collect all those personal information. The methodology itself is the same, actually. And how we utilize those data sets are pretty much similar across the world. So that's where the significant gap exists. So if we can provide enough understanding and get some consensus from those individuals that we are going to use those data sets for good reasons, and if those people can actually agree with the use of those data sets to make safer community, then it could be probable, perhaps. However, that is very complicated issue. And for that reason, that's why I'm keep saying that we need to have some strong ethical preparation first before actually we collect all those data sets and use it without too much consideration. So research, as a researcher, yes, I would love to have a lot of data sets so that I can do meaningful research work.
Thank you, Wong. That is a very nice answer. Maria, the data is directly related to your research, decision making, and machine learning. The more data, I assume, the unbiased, transparent data will be better. But I would like to hear from you. What do you think about this question?
Yeah, so in this one, I'm with the 44% who does not want this type of data collection. And this is, and I feel particularly strongly about the facial recognition technology. And here, I think that one element that I want to pick from this question is how the question ends in if it meant living in a safer community. And so I think that there, the question of safer for who and how we're defining safety is a fundamental question. But I think that in addition to that, I want to circle back to what Hwanyong said earlier in the panel, that was we often confuse our aspirational thinking and our motivation with the real impact that building and deploying certain technologies will have. And I think that this is especially true in the space of where whenever we put something under the umbrella of AI for social good, because we meant to do good, which, I mean, then we assume it has to be good when we deploy it. And I think that that gap between what we hope would happen and what actually happens when we deploy a technology can be quite big. And so in this question, there's so many conditionals that arise here. That is, who's going to have this data? There are some social contracts or some some constraints of how it will be used now, how is it going to be used in 5 years, right? And so, for instance, in the context of, to go back to the context of Colombia, in 2019, we had protests against the government, and through a lot of the main media channels, the police came out saying that they were going to be using facial recognition to identify protesters, and that they were using facial recognition that allowed to identify faces even if you were wearing a facial cover, which, by the way, is technology that got accelerated a lot under COVID, because we said, oh, now we really need you to be able to unlock your phone without taking your mask off, because that's such an important priority. And so I think that the question there of what is the data, how is the data really going to be used? And what are the guardrails that provide us with the with knowing that it's not going to be misused, and what are the risks there? I think that that's a central element that can help us move away from that more aspirational thinking.
Thank you, Maria. This is a very wonderful comment. Speak
I was
of.
just going to say that I should probably come back on that, because I agree with Maria. And we actually do have an ongoing project with World's Police Force, the police forces from around the world, and UNICRI, about guidelines, good guidelines. What are the guardrails, to use Maria's terms, that we should really be thinking about very seriously in using facial recognition in law enforcement? I mean, obviously, we're talking about facial recognition in a much wider context here, but I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you, Kay. This is a very nice discussion. And speak of guardrail, I want to ask a follow-up question from Maria. So, as we all know, regulation and guidelines has placed a strong emphasis on explainability as a guardrail for any AI technology and AI procurement guideline. Why you think this is explainability is so important? Why we have to use that as a guardrail when we deploy the AI technology?
Yeah, this is something that I think also touches a little bit on kind of the intuitive and aspirational elements that we have for technology. That is, if we're giving, I think that there's two elements in the explainability component. There's the, if AI is giving a recommendation, we want to have an explanation of, well, why was it, right? And we link these implicitly to elements like recourse. I want to be able to say, well, but that's not the case, or things like that. And that is also very linked to the importance of that we often place on having a human in the loop. And as a researcher on human AI collaboration, I really love the emphasis that is placed on this. But at the same time, I think that there's a risk of thinking about the human in the loop as this panacea, this like shock absorber from all things that could go badly. And I think that there's two specific risks there. One is, and specifically related to explainability. The first one is that recently in research, we have seen a lot of counterintuitive results for the effects of explainability. And in particular, how it may often lead to over-reliance. And so if I give you an explanation, that you're much more prone to believe what I'm saying, regardless of whether the explanation makes sense, regardless of anything. And so there's that risk of what is the actual effect of explainability, and also the fact that not all explainability, from the perspective of machine learning, explainability is kind of this bucket term that encompasses a lot of things. And for different uses, we need very different explainability. It is different if I'm a programmer debugging something and I need an explanation so that I know what to do, versus if I am allocating resources and I need an explanation that is linked to how the decision was actually made, right? And so I think that in this regard, we need to really consider that explainability is not an end in itself. Explainability is often a means to an end. We want explainability for some property, for some characteristic of the process. And so we need to ensure that the explainability we're asking for and the explainability that we're providing is actually bringing us closer to where we want to be.
Thank you, Maria. That's make total sense. I would turn to Kay. Kay has been a pioneer in AI and AI procurement policy. I would like to ask Kay, why did you choose to work in this field before anybody or everybody realized that the importance of this?
I guess it's because I am by background, as you know, a lawyer and judge, and I was a human rights lawyer and still am. And when I was working in Texas, I did a lot of work around human trafficking. And so I was writing a book one day about human trafficking and human rights and thinking about, this was before Westworld, what would happen if we as humans could abuse robots instead of people? And would we still need to abuse people? I think that obviously there's a much wider discussion than that as to, you know, whether we as humans can ever transcend our base instincts and just be civilized for things that we create, whether they are human or robot. And that my husband's a computer scientist, and we'd always had conversations about artificial intelligence as it was then. And I was just fortunate, I suppose, to be thinking about these things, to be doing my master's in law and international relations at the time when the world started to think about the impact of artificial intelligence. And as I say, in 2014, there's a lot more concentration on, would this be the end of our lives, than now the focus of the things that we've been talking about with Maria, for example, explainability. But of course, you know, it's important to still keep that super intelligence thing in our minds. And I'm pleased that people like Stuart Russell still do research on that area.
Thank you, Kay. I just want to comment on Westworld. So I'm a fan of that show. So it sounds like or look like the reality, the what they portrayed in the shows come to more and more like a reality to us. So that's both exciting and scary. So with that being said, I would turn to a light topic. Alison, please launch our third poll. So what smart city technology are you most excited about? Speak of autonomous driving vehicle, smart home devices with robots, or drone delivery service? And I would ask every panelist to comment on that as well. So.
I'll go first. We have a project just starting on aging and how we supplement the ability to age well and at home with artificial intelligence devices. And so, you know, I ticked autonomous cars because autonomous cars will enable people to be independent for much longer. Especially if you live in the country like me. But the one that I am concerned about is the drone delivery one. You know, you can see that drone delivery might be excellent if you're elderly and you can't get out, or if you're sick and you need your medicines brought to you. But equally, you know, do we want drone delivery just so we can get our packages a bit earlier? And we want to fill our skies with drones and lose birdsong in the process. So I think there's, as with everything, there are so many balances here.
Tuan, and I would like to ask you, what's your your favorite technology?
Yep. So my choice for this was based on our understanding of smart industries need and how AI should augment human capabilities. And all of this, of course, would meet that goal. But based on my interaction with the transport and logistics industry more, I have chosen the drone delivery systems.
Interesting.
Yep. Primarily because of the immense need of the logistics industry to move things around in an efficient manner, especially as COVID-19 has basically disrupted a lot of processes in the industry, and automated warehousing is becoming like a big need in all of the major logistics hubs, such as Singapore. In addition to that, I want to offer an additional smart city technology that should excite people, and that is how AI could help manufacturing processes to be more sustainable and efficient. There isn't one particular technology that would summarize that, but if you could think about how for all of our consumption needs today, if you can just reduce the carbon footprint of manufacturing plants that provide all of these goods and services to us, will be closer to a low carbon future that a lot of countries around the world have announced goals towards 2050 for. And AI is an important tool to help manufacturing companies to achieve that goal in optimizing resource use overall. Yep, of course, the like of autonomous driving vehicles and smart home technologies have been with us for the past couple of years. You can see the stock prices of all our automotive companies that excite people around the world. So there's no need for me to comment further on those.
Thank you, Tuan. We will come back to how the AI has been deployed in Singapore later. This is a very good comment. Maria and Hwanyong, what do you choose?
I clicked autonomous driving vehicles. I think that I must say, I think I'm most excited about some of the, when we think about autonomous driving vehicles, it's a little bit, we're referring to a stage a little bit farther into the future. And I think that there's a lot of big questions still down that road. But I think that in the process, there's a lot of, I'm really excited about lane keeping assistance, or a assistance that tells you of when there's a car in your blind spot. I think that these type of safety features that are, a lot of them that are AI enabled, I think that they have the potential to really make roads safer. And so I think that I clicked autonomous driving vehicles, but I think I'm at the moment especially excited more about these type of safety features that can make roads safer.
Thank you, Maria. That's a very good comment. Hwanyong?
I chose this answer based on how much impact that we can expect from those technologies. And I chose autonomous driving vehicle. I'm a drone guy. I have probably 4 or 5 drones here. I use drones a lot, so I have a high expectation in drone delivery systems. I like that. I really want to see that. But the reason I chose autonomous driving vehicles is because when we are talking about autonomous vehicle, people usually confuse that that will solve many transportation problems, such as congestion. But think about it. If we have autonomous vehicle, then we'll have a heavier congestion than now, because driving will become much easier than before. So autonomous vehicle and sharing vehicle is 2 different terms. But even though we'll have heavier congestion, just like I said, the reason I chose autonomous vehicle is because it will change entire city structure. For example, if we have enough autonomous vehicle in our city, chances are we'll have a lot of reduction in parking spaces. Actually, we do not need individual parking spaces right in front of your front yard, because the government can provide a large enough public parking spaces nearby your houses. Then your car can drop you off and you can automatically park yourself. So what that means is that we can have more space for probably public parks, probably more landscaping, more environment, rather than we sacrifice more space into the cars. That's kind of the thing that I'm looking for. I know Maria told us about safety feature. I like that. I use that actually in my life. But as an urban planning expert, I think if we have autonomous vehicle, then we have a higher probability that we can change entire structure of urban fabrics that actually exist in our city. That's the reason I chose autonomous vehicle.
Thank you, Nguyen. This is good to see our panelists has a different opinion. 2 was 2. I want to go back to audience question. We have a question from audience. How can we fight against the bias in algorithm? If people disagree with providing their personal information, how should the government address policy to prevent bias in AI? I think that's a very interesting, legit question. So I'll open this to our panelists.
So I'm happy to get started on it. So this is a great question. I think that it touches on a lot of different elements. I think that there's one difference, I think, between, I think that there's the risk of, I think that we're bucketing often AI ethics as equivalent to AI bias. That is the topic that has received the most attention recently. And so when we were talking about elements like facial recognition, I think that that's a question there. The risks of AI ethics are not, there is a risk of bias, but that is not the only risk. In that context, one of the elements that we're concerned about is that accurate technologies can also be harmful. And so even if we say, well, we fix the problem of facial recognition being biased and working differently, for instance, for different skin colors, there is still a huge, there's a lot of ethical risks associated to that. And so I think that in a lot of cases, the risk that we're concerned about most pressingly is not bias, but it's other elements. And that is the reason to not collect the information. There is, however, a lot of context in which we say, well, if we want what is termed fairness on fairness through awareness, that is, if we have a private, personal, if we have personal data that has been collected, and we want to ensure that there's no bias against one subgroup of the population, for instance, how do we do it when we have certain legislations where you're not allowed to use, for instance, attributes like race or gender? You're not allowed to collect these or use that in your algorithm. And I think that there's a huge opportunity for research and knowledge of how ML biases work to inform legislation, which in a lot of cases, this legislation was grounded on how humans are going to be making use of these decisions. And the one thing that we need to be very careful in doing so is that we're not legislating under the mind of the best case scenario of assuming that we'll be using this data in the way that we hope people will be using it, but also considering what are misuses of this data.
Thank you, Maria. Any comment from our panelists, other panelists? By the way,
I would like to just make a quick comment here, Junfeng. I think I agree with what Maria has said, and I would like to just comment on the second part of the question on how should governments address policies to prevent biases in AI. I feel that while government does play an important role in setting guidelines and policies that effect change in market behaviors, in order to truly prevent biases and to effect fairness, transparency, accountability, it is important that the AI service provider and their clients can actually have can actually advise and implement an internal government structure to make sure that the data that their processes are collecting are not being abused, and to prevent all of these sort of unethical considerations that we may have. So the point is, government do play a big part, but the internal governance that each company, even each individual, ourselves as consumers could play, will play an important role to make AI work for us.
Thank you, Tuan. Like, there's a follow-up question from the audience related to this discussion. If personal identifying information was so important and became more permanent over time, do you recommend more regulation or protective service along with it to make a consumer feel more comfortable to share this information? So I would like to combine the two questions together and ask how our panelists, the rest of the panel, thinking about it, PII.
Well, I guess it's my turn. Well, this is quite related to the previous question as well. And well, I don't think there is enough protective services or enough regulation that you can feel safe. Even if we provide any means of regulation or protections, there will be always, people will find a way to use inappropriately the data sets. And it's really hard to regulate everything. If you look at the latest regulation about social network services, it's really hard to actually regulate those services' negative impact, really hard. So that's the reason why I talked about when I was doing a panel discussion, right? That's the reason why the speed of technology and speed of political preparation has a huge gap between those two. The solution, well, it's really hard, but if we can, this is purely my personal opinion, but if the accuracy of the data and the result of AI, artificial intelligence, and if that accuracy become a great competitor in our market, then probably those AI service providers will use correct data sets. And if that's kind of the new market that we can actually have some kind of competency between those service providers, then there will be a little chance that we can use the proper data set for proper reasons. And this is really hard. And we cannot just make the government to regulate everything. We need to really collaborate with private sectors as well with regard to this issue. And that's the reason why we need to have some time to actually fully digest what we are trying to do and what we want to do with all those new technologies.
Absolutely. And I think that brings us full circle back to procurement. You know, why did the UK government choose to do guidelines and a workbook that helped to create good practices around procurement? Because it's iterative and we don't know all the answers yet. And if we regulate without knowing the answers, then we are probably going to have to undo that regulation, and that's hard. Whereas having a iterative framework at the moment is probably an easier and better way of tackling this. We actually did some work with the Singaporean government around their work on encouraging companies to get people trained around ethical AI and what companies should know about ethical AI. And that's a different approach by government, but it's also a valid approach by government. And I think what we're seeing at the moment is different governments are approaching things differently to try and move this ball forward.
Thank you, Kay. very nice comment. Speak of Singapore, I really want to hear from Tuan. So we hear so many good things about Singapore, and we want to know how has Singapore been developing and building its AI framework.
So back to the story of how Singapore is driving our smart nation mandate. With the emerging of AI and data technologies, Singapore announced our national AI strategy some 2 years ago to deploy AI at a national scale for impactful outcomes, both socially and economically, across various sectors, right? And we deployed Singapore as a whole, deploy two key approaches to making sure that AI is being developed in a responsible and ethical manner. The first is, as Kay has actually mentioned, there's been a lot of industry partnership built and led by the government, specifically the Ministry of Communication and Information, as well as the Monetary Authority of Singapore, representing the financial services sector. They have actually brought together a consortium of various stakeholders, from businesses to the civil society, and as well as investors, to build guidelines, to have a multi-year process to refine and update these guidelines. And I think just last year, Kay, together with our Minister for Communications and Information, actually announced the updated version of this model AI framework at Davos. And I think the major improvement that we notice is the shift from principles to practice. So the updated version actually includes more use cases on how companies, from multinationals to startups, are deploying AI, building internal governance recommendations to make sure that AI and data are not being abused and are transparent and explainable. It is important because from our and the second approach that Singapore as a whole takes is community engagement. From our perspective, we were talking to thousands of people on a yearly basis, and everyone was excited about AI until a point when people started asking questions such as, why should I trust my healthcare decision to an AI tool? Or are the banks discriminating against me based on historical data? And suddenly everyone starts asking questions that slow the speed of trust, and therefore AI solutions and innovations might actually not be scaled up at a pace that we would like to see. And so SGInnovate, together with our government partners as well as our international partners, have been driving and sustaining a lot of these conversations, consultations, and collaborations throughout the year to make sure that as many people, businesses, and organizations are aware that they should actually pay attention to this AI ethics issue, not because it is good, but because it is commercially important for them to actually tackle this matter right from the start. So with these two approaches, where the government and the industry will come up with guidelines and the ecosystem is being educated to be more aware, we hope to be able to have a more AI-ready society out of Singapore in the near future.
Thank you, Tuan. Certainly the trust of AI, trust of technology is very, very important to whatever we do. So we almost at the time. I would like to ask our panelists again, do you have any final remark related to today's discussion? If you have, please, this is time.
I was just going to say thank you so much to UT for facilitating this panel and the whole week. It's been amazing, and I hope that it's been really useful and will continue to be really useful.
Thank you, Kay. And certainly, as the chair of Good System, I would like to say thank you to all the panelists for this morning event. And I want to say thank you again to our wonderful staff, Tessa, Andrea, and Alison, for organizing this to make this happen. Last but not the least, I want to say thank you so much to Kay for bringing World Economic Forum to UT. for this week, for the wonderful week for AI procurement guideline. We hope this is the starting of a wonderful relationship between World Economic Forum and the UT. We certainly look forward to it. And thank you all very much.